All right, guys are live.
Thank you, Jacob. Good evening, everybody. What a pleasure it is to have Simon Gervais. How do you want to pronounce it, Simon? I'm going to say Gervais because I speak French.
Gervais is the way to go. I mean, I'm a French Canadian, so I guess I speak French at home 99% of the time. So my name is Simon Gervais, but I understand that my market is 99.5 in the United States. So everybody calls me Simon Gervais. It doesn't matter.
Gervais. All right. Well, I'll stick with that then. And the wonderful Brian Freeman, whom I'm happy to say I've seen a lot of in the last few years, thanks to COVID, because his home territory is up in Minnesota and he hasn't traveled as much as I would wish, but I'm hoping that will change. But apparently not in November when your new Jonathan Stride book comes out.
But next one we'll get back there. So
next one, all right, that'll be great.
And hopefully in a January or February timeframe where when the weather is cold up in Minnesota.
You chicken, you don't want to come to Scottsdale in July, do you? And who could blame you? Simon would probably disintegrate. Oh well. Anyway, we're here to talk about Robert Ludlum because Simon is a new author to the Ludlum universe. And I thought it might be interesting to kind of talk about Robert Ludlum for a minute because he's been dead now for 21 years. I looked it up. Died in 2001. And I'm thinking that we may be speaking in part to a generation of readers who is not familiar with his work. So, Brian, talk to us a bit about Ludlum, and then Simon, who's probably had to learn it on a fairly steep curve, can add in.
Well, yeah, you would think that after 20 plus years that that the audience of folks who know Ludlum books may be decreasing, but boy, it has not seemed that way to me when I talk to audiences about my Bourne books. I mean, I'm always finding people that knew the original Bourne Identity and Bourne Supremacy, Bourne Ultimatum. So and that may be partly because of the popularity of the Matt Damon movies has kept the Bourne story in particular sort of alive for Ludlum readers even today. But I look back on Ludlum. I mean, I was such a huge Ludlum fan growing up in the 1970s and then into the 1980s. And I think in so many ways Ludlum kind of defined the modern thriller. I mean, I think his sense of pace, his sort of propulsive narration, it just sort of laid the foundation for so many of the authors that were to follow in the last 3 decades. So I look back on the fact that he died 20 years ago. It was just a couple of years before I broke through in the business, and one of the regrets of my life is I never had a chance to meet him in person. I really would have enjoyed that.
Yeah, I think same thing for me in a way. I would have loved to meet Robert Ludlum. I mean, he is the reason why I fall in love with reading when I was a teenager. My parents and I, we were traveling to Florida. As I mentioned before, I'm French Canadian, so we lived in Montreal at the time. And what happened is that we were driving to Florida for our vacations. And my mom stopped by the libraries to pick a few Ludlum books. And the first book that I have ever read, like the first real thriller, the first real 400-page book that I read was The Bourne Identity. And I just thought it was the best book ever. And still years later, I thought it was the best book. I fall in love with the way he wrote, with the tension that he was able to put on every pages. I love the action and I love the intricacy that he had in his novels. So this is what I knew from Robert Ludlum. But to get back to your question, Barbara, I agree with Brian about the people that do know who Robert Ludlum is bigger than I thought it was. Even for my own series within the universe, of course, when I say it's within the Jason Bourne universe, they understand. But even when I say Blackbriar, people know what Blackbriar is because it was mentioned so many times in the movies with Matt Damon that people remember that, oh, Blackbriar, okay, it's associated with the world of Robert Ludlum. So I think that the estate and Putnam came with a brilliant idea to start a new series within the Jason Bourne universe called Blackbriar because it's a catchy name.
Well, absolutely. I mean, Treadstone, I had to actually ask, proving that I'm not a Robert Ludlum reader, but, I can't read the whole universe. I had to actually ask what Treadstone meant. So what is it?
Well,
Well,
Treadstone actually emerged in the Bourne Identity, and Treadstone
Right.
was the group that sort of sent this assassin out to catch an assassin. If you go back to the original Bourne Identity, the whole mission behind the Bourne Identity was to try to catch the assassin known as Carlos, and so Treadstone created this identity of a killer that was in competition with Carlos in order to try to draw Carlos out. And that was the man. His name was David Webb. He went under the identity of Jason Bourne, but when he was shot, he lost his memory, and so he didn't really know who he was and whether he was a killer, which I just think is such great fodder for thrillers, and that great psychological complexity is what has made Bourne such an enduring hero. But I think what's interesting, and Simon touches on this in terms of Blackbriar, there's a lot of the Ludlum universe today is really drawn back to the movies, because I think the image that people have of what Treadstone is comes very much out of the Treadstone you see in the Matt Damon movies, which is really very different from the Treadstone that Ludlum created in his books, which I mean I think is just fine. It does mean that we end up sort of on these strange parallel paths. It's sort of like my book Infinite. We have these parallel Ludlum universes going on. So.
Yeah, exactly. I'm trying sometimes to do a little wink at the previous Bourne. In the Blackbriar Genesis, remember Brian, when we were talking about Treadstone and the first Bourne identity, they were talking about Treadstone 71, right?
Yes, exactly.
So in the Blackbriar, in the book that I write, I said that the directive to resurrect Blackbriar would be called Directive 71.2. So I don't think a lot of people will notice, but as big Ludlum fans, some people will say, okay, right. I caught it. I understand why Simon did this. Just to say, I respect what the icon that he did in his time. So I want to circle back once in a while to the original trilogy.
Right. Well, and tell us how this all came about, and kind of how you got approached for this, and I mean I always think that the backstory on these kinds of projects it's really fascinating.
It really is, and I forgot to say, congratulations! This is publication day, is it not?
Yeah. Yes,
so, Simon, very exciting for you.
Congratulations! That is, and it's a terrific book. We're going to get into the details in a little bit, but it reads so smoothly. It's a fantastic launch to the series.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Brian. Coming from you, it means a lot because I'm a big fan of the 3 books that you wrote for the estate. As for me, I started my career, first of all, I'm a retired RCMP officer, which is a Royal Canadian Mounted Police. So I did that in the military for about 15 years. And when I left in 2014, 2015, I started to write. And it took me a few years to break through, like most writers. And I signed a book deal with Thomas and Mercer, and I starting to, my book were selling really well. And unfortunately, we're only allowed to publish one Simon Gervais book a year with Thomas and Mercer because they have a lot of other authors and they know their numbers, they know the data. And he said, we can publish like an action thriller like you about once a year. And I said, it's perfectly fine. But I can write 2 books a year because I'm retired and this is what I want to do. So this is about 3 years ago. And Tom Colgan and I, the editor at Putnam, I won't say we were friends, but we've known each other. We met at conferences. He's a good friend with Mark Graney, who's a friend of mine. He's the editor for other guys that I know really well. So every time we were at the bar, we chat and, we say it would be fun to work together on something at some point. But it never kind of worked out because he had Brian, he had Josh for the Ludlum, he has Don Bentley, Mark Cameron, Mark Graney for the Clancy, Madden before this. So, it was full. But at some point, I just ended a book to my editor, Liz, at Thomas and Mercer. And I said, you know what, I have 6 months. I'm not sure I'm going to get another contract yet. So I'm just going to send an email to Tom Colgan and say, Tom, I know you have all the writers that you need for your estate, but I have 6 months. If something comes up, let me know. And within 24 hours, he replied and say, Simon, I cannot believe you email me on this very day because I just got an email. I cannot talk to you what it is about, but I was thinking about you. And he says, it's so weird. So I don't hear back from him. But just at the end of this email, he said, P.S., this is really weird, Simon, like 3 ... Okay, so I
That
come
sounds
back
like
and
Tom.
yeah. So I'm nervous. So I sent that to my agent. I said, is it good? He said, yeah, of course it's good. Like, it's going to be interesting. So I was ready to do pretty much anything. But for me, writing under the estate of Robert Ludlum was an objective, a dream, really, just to remind that I started reading. He is the author that really drove me into reading when I was a young kid. So for me, it's a major honor. So anyway, 3 months later, Tom sent me an email and said, I can finally tell you what it is. The Ludlum Estate would like to start a new series. And we think you'd be the perfect match. We love your book with Thomas and Mercer. You have a big followership. You're selling a lot of books. I think it would be good for everybody. I say, and I agree. So the way it worked, I don't know, if Brian, if it was the same thing for you or for Josh with the Treadstone, but I had to write an outline. Like Tom sent me like a paragraph of an idea that he had or the estate, and then I wrote him a 4,000 to 5,000 word outline, very very thorough outline. And waited a month or two. The estate come back. Tom came back, said, we love it. Just it's yours. It's your series. Do, write under the Ludlum umbrella a Simon Gervais book. And I think the objective of the Blackbriar series is to be a mix between the Jason Bourne series and the Treadstone. Treadstone is pretty much pure action, and yours are very cerebral. You are an excellent writer of psychological thriller, and that comes through in the Jason Bourne book. So for me, it was mixing both of them type of thing. And because I'm an action thriller guy, but another level, I don't try the type of action Josh does. I've never been in combat as an infantryman like he was. So for me, it's very different perspective. My time as a law enforcement officer in counterterrorism was mostly about investigation and these type of things. It was not like as an operator like these guys were. So it's a very different mindset. So that's why I'm trying to bring to the Ludlum Estate. And I think that with our 3 series together, I think it's going to be fantastic for the next few years.
I'm curious, was it when you first kind of got the call, was it intimidating? I mean, I remember when I got the call about Bourne, my first reaction was, oh my God, and then my next reaction was, oh my God. Because you think about stepping into the shoes of a giant of the genre like Ludlum, and then particularly, sort of an iconic, enduring hero like Bourne. And it took a while to sort of wrap my head around that and figure out how I was going to sort of turn that tension to my creative advantage. And I'm just curious kind of how you approach that and kind of how emotionally you dealt with the creative side of things. So.
I think I was lucky, Brian, because you had to understand the Jason Bourne characters. I understand that you did a complete reset when you started the series, and obviously it was the right decision because it would have been very hard to try to keep track of everything that happened. It was on its own universe. The reset was it was the way to go. But you still had to understand the character of Jason Bourne. For me, I was giving carte blanche to start a new series within the Jason Bourne universe. So I didn't have to, I was not as, I don't think it was as stressful as it was for you just because of that. I knew where I was going, and my objective, and I hope that the readers will like that. My objective is to bring the series together, is to be the guy in the middle that's joining everything. I don't want people to have to say, okay, I need to read the Treadstone or the Jason Bourne to read the Blackbriar, or the same thing. Just, I need to read all the Blackbriar to get to the next Jason Bourne. This is not what it is. Our novels are standalone part of a series, so you can purchase any one of them, and we're gonna guarantee you 6 to 8 hours of pure entertainment. But at the same time, for purists like me, who like to see where the stories are going and how they're connected, I think this is what I this is what I did with Blackbriar, because I'm using the Treadstone director as one of my characters as well, Levi Shaw, and I do mention Jason Bourne, Adam Hayes, but I don't do point of view scenes with them. I just mention in passing. I know they exist. This is what they are doing while this story is going on, and I think it's working like this.
Right, right, and I think readers love those just kind of little Easter eggs between the series. I mean, I don't think they expect them to overlap, but having a character pop into the other one, I know that readers love that kind of stuff. I think probably the most feedback I've ever had from readers from one moment in my book was all the way back in my third Stride novel, Stalked, where I had my hero Stride make a joke about a crime scene resembling a John Sanford novel, and just readers went wild over that. So.
Oh wow.
That's true. I really, really like them. So while I was out letting in the Organ Man, I missed saying something. It seems to me that, in the first place, not every writer leaves a literary estate that is able to continue the writer's work. And I actually have this conversation with many writers saying, what do you want to happen to your characters or your universe if something happens to you? And if you don't take legal measures to make your wishes known and whatever, anything can happen. So, obviously the Ludlum estate is okay with it. But it seemed to me that the Jason Bourne movies have had a lot to keeping the Ludlum estate alive. Yeah. Because there really is a kind of normal thing when an author is no longer writing for whatever reason, death or retirement, or the publisher has less incentive to keep the older books in print. The audience is not all woo-woo about a new book coming and so forth. So what is it that keeps the character or universe alive? Certainly the movies have a huge amount to do with it.
They do, and honestly, I'm so surprised in this era of popular franchises that they have not yet resurrected Bourne and done another Jason Bourne movie. I mean, I recognize that Matt Damon's probably aged out of the role by this point, but that would be true of the Bond movies as well. It just seems like in this day and age, it's crying out. It would be just perfect to have a new Jason Bourne movie coming out, and I'd love to see it because I think that would have great spillover effect on all of the books in the Ludlum universe.
Well, maybe they'll take an interest in Treadstone or Blackbriar. You don't know whether. Anyway, I just thought that it seemed to me obvious that the film franchise kept the Ludlum universe at everybody's, so he's more familiar than he would be to young readers who weren't reading him when he was alive, than would be normally true. So anyway, Simon, why don't you tell us what your book's about? I mean, I love all this background, but why don't you give us like the elevator pitch for the actual story?
Yeah, I've never been a great guy to pitch my stories, but
well, Brian can do it for you if you prefer.
The Blackbriar Genesis really is about a theme of so Treadstone is all about assassination, and I didn't want to do that. I don't think the estate wanted to do that. Tom didn't want to do that as well for another series. So my specialty, when I used to work for the NCRP, I did a lot of counterterrorism or counterintelligence, counter-surveillance. So that's what I want. That's what I'm bringing to the party, type of thing. That's what I wanted to do with Blackbriar. In the movies, Blackbriar started as something that was supposed to replace Treadstone and was shut down in the Senate committee. So I'm picking this up. I'm following what happened before through the movies, and I see it's being resurrected right now, not as a replacement to Treadstone, but as another agency completely. That's a covert agency that specializes in counterintelligence, that's doing things that the FBI can't or won't do. So mostly it's going to strike preemptively overseas to make sure that the American secret or its allies are not spilled everywhere. So this is the premises of the Blackbriar and probably the entire series. So this book really starts with two new protagonists called Donovan Wave and Hélène Joubert. And Hélène is a former counterintelligence special agent with the FBI, and Donovan Wade is a CIA case officer. So they're not killers, they're not like Jason Bournes, but they are able to fight and they can shoot, and there's like it's still an action thriller. But I wanted to be more on the investigative side as well. So really we're following, it's a globe-trotting adventure that starts in Cairo in Egypt, and that, it goes by Montenegro, it goes to Greece. I'm doing a lot of international places on that book because this is what I love to read. And I think that people that like my international thrillers for my other series just going to jump onto this one and they're going to love it too.
I thought you had a really interesting creative challenge in this book because you were trying to kind of pull off a number of things at once, because you need to establish the concept of Blackbriar, the agency, and kind of lay a foundation for how did it come about, what's its mission, how does it differentiate from Treadstone or from the FBI. You need to establish the characters, the agents in the field, as well as Oliver, the head of Blackbriar, and then you also have to have a plot going on around it, and sort of have that grabbing readers as well. I'm curious, how did you go about balancing all those issues? Because you had a lot to do this in launching a series where you're sort of creating this whole new aspect of the universe.
Yeah, right. So I had a discussion with Tom about this, and he said, I don't want you to start at their first adventure together, Donovan and Hélène. I want you to start the book with them already have been on a 2 or 3 mission together. I don't want you to introduce them so they shake hands and they don't know each other, because it's been done before and we don't want that. We want the story to start right away. So that's what I did. I started with them in Greece. And at some point, I'm realizing as I write the book, like, I need a little bit more background than that. It's all nice and fun that they're already in the action, but people will want to understand what's Blackbriar. How did it came to be? Who's the boss of Blackbriar? So I say, I'm going to create something at the beginning of the book. I'm going to bring Oliver Menton, who becomes later on the director of Blackbriar, but he previously was a Treadstone agent. And that Treadstone agent was in Egypt, and his job was to protect Iron King, American official, who was there unofficially to deal with the political party in Egypt that was a terrorist organization. So he was not supposed to be there. That's why they asked Treadstone to accompany him there. So of course they get ambushed. There's a lot of shooting going on. There's RPGs, but there's a bond in between those two guys, Oliver Menton and Russell, who becomes the DNI later on the book. So when he realized that he needs to create another agency, and he's going to go to Oliver Menton because he is the guy that saved his life. He's the guy that he can trust 100%. And that's the type of guy he needs to head Blackbriar. So that's how I started. That's the first part of the book, but it's not the first part that I wrote. It came later when I realized that I'm going to need to ground this, because somebody who comes from the Treadstone book or the Jason Bourne, what's Blackbriar? Why is Simon talking in his book about Treadstone? What is, where does Blackbriar stand? Now, with that beginning, I think readers will know exactly what Blackbriar is and what it stands for within the universe.
Yeah, I thought that was really, really good, the way you created a foundation for Oliver and for Russell in those opening scenes. So it just made perfect sense. You established the relationship that then sort of Blackbriar blossomed out of that. That was really nice.
Yeah, thank you very much.
So guys, when you're doing this kind of thing, in Britain it's fairly clear cut. We have MI5 and MI6, and we know largely what both of them is supposed to do, but we have overlapping agencies here. But to really make these thrillers work, do you have to create off the book agencies essentially? I mean, they can't really be the FBI or the CIA.
Yeah, I mean, I think clearly that's what Ludlums did originally with Treadstone and Bourne, and for me, I even sort of do it a little bit one step removed, because what if there's one thing that Bourne has taken away from his experiences with Treadstone, is that he does not know who to trust, and doesn't tend to trust the government that's trying to direct him. And so he establishes kind of this hands-off relationship with Treadstone, where they end up sort of overlapping at times, and they sort of need each other at times, and yet at the same time, Bourne doesn't want to get too far in bed with these guys because he doesn't trust them. So and inevitably, that means that you're taking some liberties with what what these characters can do, and what these agencies can do. But I don't think readers have a lot of problem with that, and it's actually, I think that really goes back to sort of a foundation of Ludlum's work. I mean, he relied so much in his plotting on these really intricate, interesting conspiracies, and I think that all sort of came out of the 70s era in terms of Watergate and Vietnam, and the things that emerged out of that. If you look at where things are in the world today, I don't know that readers have any problem sort of imagining these conspiracy theories, because they're sort of rife everywhere.
No, not at all. But if you think about Clancy, we have the campus, Jack Bryan Sr. and Jr. going strong. I mean, let's go over to Clive Cussler, and he's got Numa, which is a sort of quasi-official agency, and then branches of that, because Clive's universe is actually not so closely knit as the Ludlum universe, because he's got different authors, but they're in actually different worlds, and that's another interesting way to do it. It just seems to me, as a thriller writer, it's very hard for you to stay within the confines of an actual FBI or CIA operation, because then you'd have to stick to their guidelines on what they're allowed to do and their chains of command. And I mean, yeah, I'm not even sure they are.
I could tell you that it would be boring for me to write that, because this is what I used to do for a living, and it's lots of note taking, lots of exhibit handling, lots of court time, lots of time on the phone. It's a slow progress, the investigation. It was a little bit more interesting when I was working for protective services and counter surveillance. It was a little bit more action oriented, but still then, there was so many things that you couldn't do that it was frustrating. And maybe down very deep, it's one of the reasons I started writing. I don't know, because it was so frustrating to work within a box. And don't get me wrong, I understand where there's a box, because you don't want your law enforcement officer to do whatever they want. You need to have laws established, and Canada and the United States, we're a society of laws, and we follow them. I get that. But in your mind, you say, it would be so easy if I could have, I know this guy did it, I just cannot prove it legally. And of course, this is all the fun that we have when we write our books, is that we don't have to follow all the rules of law, because it would be, I don't think it would be a good entertainment. It could be if you're somebody's looking for a police procedural, it's fine. But when you buy a Jason book or a Blackbriar or a Treadstone book, you want action. You don't, you want to suspend your belief a little bit. So that's why we take liberty that, of course, it wouldn't happen in real life, but I don't think the readers mind, because when you buy a Jason Bourne book or Blackbriar, you know that this agency doesn't really exist.
Yeah, but I think it's more than that, Simon. I don't think that, I agree with you that readers don't mind, but I also think that readers tend to identify with whatever this off the books agency is. And, it becomes a real character in the book. I mean, that's why you're calling it Treadstone or whatever it is. And I think readers get into that world. I'm thinking about Sigma Force for Jim Rollins. I mean, I spend my life doing this, right? So I'm walking in and out of these universes practically every day. But
it can be a little.
And the thing is that sorry, that's the dogs coming home. They're all excited. when you create that agency or whatever, then you get to populate it with other people that readers get attached to. And that makes it, if you think of it, it's really almost like one of the, like the cozy thing stood on its head, because people are attracted to some of these cozy franchises because they like the other characters, not just the main protagonist, but they love the rest of the cast. I just did one for David Rosenfeld, for example, and the fans, it was a live event, lots of dogs, because we did it as a golden retriever rescue thing, and that was really fun. But you can see the fans were asking about not just Andy the lawyer, but they want to know about Marcus, and they wanted to know about the dog, it was a key character, and all this other stuff. So I think when you're creating these worlds that these guys are operating in, it gives you a chance to get fans invested in those other characters along with Jason or whoever it might happen to be. So Simon, for you, that would have been, who have you populated your world with that you envision returning?
Well, for now, like that's what I said. Like I'm known to write 3-book series. I think this one's going to be longer, of course, but you can't get too attached to any of my characters. There's something's going to happen with them,
Oh, warning.
It's not a Game of Thrones type of books that I do, but there are some good people that will die. Having said that, when you work with the estate of Robert Ludlum, it's a little bit different, because the characters don't, even though I'm the one who write them, they don't really belong to me. And if they get very popular, you don't want to kill them off with a shot behind the head by like a lost bullet type of thing. Every death needs to be meaningful, because I understand people get attached to it, and they can be, very upset, and they can stop buying the series if they get too upset. So it's a fine line to work, because for me, it's not fun to read a book, a thriller, that I know everybody's going to survive. It's not fun for me. I want to have skin in the game. Of course, we're not talking about the main characters, but at some point, it's okay for people to get attached and then they die in the book. For me, it's acceptable. But I want to go back to one of the things that you mentioned, because I thought it was very funny when you said the agency that we create kind of become a character in the book. I remember the first time I typed in Treadstone when I was writing the manuscript, Treadstone and Blackbriar, and I wrote Jason Bourne. I asked my wife, can you believe what I'm doing right now? I'm creating stuff in the world of Robert Ludlum. I'm actually talking about Jason Bourne. I have an impact on what this guy will do, or about Treadstone. And for me, it was like a wow moment. Say, okay, I feel like I'm not powerful or influential. I'm in my little house doing something on a computer. But for me, it was a big moment. It's like, oh my God, I'm creating stuff that will have hundreds of thousands of people that will be interested in learning about this. So it was really fun to create, as you mentioned, those agencies in our universe that people hopefully will get attached to, for many more books.
Right. It's actually a world building exercise, not that different from people who write fantasy and science fiction. Except it's theoretically more real, but on the other hand, it actually isn't, right? It is fiction, but that has to be part of the fun, is building that world. Here's Brian writing 3 different kinds of books, and they're all different. You've got that's right in the police department. You've got your Ludlum thing, and then you're writing yet other books. And
right.
I often wonder how you keep it all straight.
Well, that's actually what makes it fun. I think if I were doing multiple books and they were all the same kind of book, it would get sort of creatively less interesting. That's what I enjoy, is that I can pick up a stride novel and write this very intricate police procedural and put that down, and then pick up one of my standalones like I Remember You, and it's sort of out there and Michael Crichton-esque, and I can get the chance to play around with some really unusual plots and themes, and then put that down and pick up a Jason Bourne novel, and it's so action focused and adrenaline focused, and the fact that they're all so different, and that I have the opportunity to tell such different stories and create such different characters, that's what really keeps me energized.
So Simon, do you think that your other writing will reflect some of what you're doing with this new series? It's almost bound to change the way you go about some things.
I think it's going to be a good mix, because I'm used to write shorter books. For me, because with Thomas and Mercer, most of my sales are online. And people that read on Kindles tend to prefer books that are slightly shorter than people that pay for the big hardcover books. So my books usually tend between 70 and 80,000 words. Um, and Robert Ludlum was 110,000 words. This is the longest book I've ever written, and I loved it. It was a lot of fun writing a long book. I was able to develop maybe a little more. There was a little bit less action, but character development maybe was a little bit more deep. So I think I'm probably going to start writing slightly longer book with my other series, and I might shorten the Ludlum a little bit as well, and maybe go back to 95 and something like. I think I'm gonna play like this. But as for the action, I think it's pretty much the same. I try to write action that is realistic. We talked about suspense of belief when it came to organization and the type of characters that we're going to put into these organizations. But when it comes to action, I like to write actions that I know could happen in real life. I'm not saying it's 100% accurate, but it's something that, for me as a former police officer or infantry officer, I need my former colleagues, if they read my book, they're going to say, okay, you know what he's talking about. It's not, his tactics are not BS. I mean, it might not be, because I left 10 years ago, it might not be as updated as somebody that was there like 2 years ago, but it's still what we used to do. And people will say, oh my God, this is impossible. You just shut down a chopper with a pistol. You'd never see that in one of my books.
Well, and that was, I remember reading an interview with Ludlum years ago, and he talked about violence and action scenes, and talked about the fact that he really wanted, if one of his heroes was shot or hit, I mean, they hurt and they experience pain, and he didn't want to sort of make it kind of this superhero sort of approach. He wanted his action scenes to be very grounded in what it really felt like and the physical ramifications of that. I'm curious how you go about kind of blocking out your action scenes, because I know for me that's often the hardest part of the books, because I mean, action scenes are always fun in the movies, and you can kind of see how they fit together very well in the movies, but keeping the reader understanding what's really going on in the action scene and having it flow smoothly so that the reader can kind of feel exactly what's going on, that's a really interesting challenge. I'm curious how you approach that.
I've done so many scenarios in my career. Don't forget, I did 15 years of it in the infantry and then as a police officer. So I had a lot of scenario-based training as well. So I know what it is to be involved in a firefight or to go do a raid on a house. I understand what you think as a police officer, as in a word, when you approach, how do you feel inside, how nervous you are. Then the guy beside you, is he somebody has been with the team for like 2-3 years, or is he somebody that joined the team or the SWAT team 2 months ago? It's all about how you feel, and the tactics are not that complicated. But when it comes to writing, you're saying for you maybe it's a little bit more complicated. For me, when I'm blocked a little bit, I'm just going to create an action scene, because this is what I love to do. And sometimes I say, okay, I'm going to write a 1-page action scene, and and it turns out into a 15-page firefight or something like this. And then after that, I'm going to read it. It's a little bit too long, so I'm going to cut it out a little bit. But I love that. And for me, it's not the most complicated part of writing. It's certainly not the action scene. Sometimes is when I have, let's say, too many threads and I need to bring them back together. This is when I really need to think and say, how can I make this believable? But when it comes to actions, I'm not worried that somebody that's going to read it, that knows stuff about tax, is going to say, okay, this is fairly accurate.
Okay, but don't you have to visualize it? I mean, this is sort of like blocking if you were staging a play, and you've got a stage and actors and you have to block them out. I mean, as an editor, I found that was the hardest thing for me, because I don't have any of your experience. So action for me is cerebral rather than actual. And I can remember trying to work my way through, some action scenes and try to figure out where everybody was, and where they were coming in from, and what would happen. And I found that hard. So do you just see it in your head?
I do see it in my head, and I'm hoping that I'm clear on the page as well. Now I'm nervous because when I read it, for me, it's very clear what's going on. Of course, there's the setting of the scene that's important as well. You know, they're going to talk about the plan that they hatched together before going into battle. So at least you're able to position everything. At least it's clear in my mind. But having said that, I remember a discussion that I had with one of my friends who's writing for the Clancy Estate and Tom, and we're talking about maps that are often inserted in Tom Clancy's book because they are so complicated. Sometimes geopolitics is so complicated in their books that they actually need to map out what is where and when it happened type of thing. But my books is much more tactical than at the strategical level. So I think it's a much clearer to understand what's going on in my type of book than if we're talking about an epic book like a Clancy.
I always think about the Robert Downey Sherlock Holmes movies where they approach the action scenes by first having him imagine step by step what's going to be happening and how, and then they play it in full motion after the end. Well, it's like, well, yeah, if only I could do that and just kind of okay, reader, here's what's going to happen next, and now you can go through it.
Excellent point. So one other thing you raised before we get to your questions, so you used the word geopolitical more than once. Do you think that readers in these universes are expecting a global, they're expecting a very wide field of action? We're not just going to be like in North Carolina, but we're going to be, ranging around the globe.
That's a good question. That's a question that I asked Tom when I signed up for this. I said, what do you want? You want to send a continental United States, or you want to go international? Say, Ludlum is going to be international. We want, at least Blackbriar, we want it to be international. And I was happy about this because for me, a Ludlum book is a book that goes into Vienna, it goes in Prague, it goes into Paris. This is, for me, this is a Ludlum book. So I would have been disappointed if you would have asked me to stay just in the continental United States. Like for me, an international thriller, you need to travel and be a globetrotting character.
I think it's one of the attractions for readers. I really do, especially during COVID when we couldn't go anywhere. I thought it was very interesting for readers.
The thriller as travelogue. So.
Well, I love Brad Thor's last book because he took. I mean, we're in India and we're up on the the frontier with China, the northeast frontier of India, and then we're wandering around in Afghanistan and all. But I mean, he took a thriller to a place that nobody really uses. Contemporary India, maybe we've seen them up on the Silk Road or through Uzbekistan or somewhere, but and I love that. I thought it was really, but I'm not sure that all readers loved it. I'm wondering, to some degree, how much of it was a risk to go to someplace so unfamiliar for the reader of this sort of book. I don't know. Last time he was in Norway. I mean, and Brad's actually written one that took place in the United States with evil Chinese agents and stuff. So he really likes to mix up his geography.
Yeah, I do too. Like in the Blackbriar, I said we go to France, go to Egypt, Greece, but we also go to North Macedonia, and not that many people know about this country. It's a landlocked country. It's super interesting. Right. And I have a foot chase going on in the old town. So I think it's interesting. I wanted to discover another place, and when I was researching the novel, I've learned so much thing about this country. So it's I think the readers will like that. And sometime in my Facebook feed or Twitter feed, I'm going to see people thanking me. Saying, Simon, thank you so much because we traveled through your books. All my books are international tour. I've never done something that's set only in one little town type of thing. And people say, we love looking at your picture because you travel a lot, and we love to read your book because it makes us travel with you. So you know what? My book will never be picked by, Oprah or something like that. But I can guarantee you that I'm going to give you 8 hours of pure entertainment. Especially if you like to travel, you're going to travel with me.
I've always thought that was one of the attractions of the Bond franchise. That with James Bond, you got to roam around to really wonderful settings. There's a neat little book coming out that I'm going to be doing a talk to the author. It's all about the science in the James Bond movies, and M and the role of back when we were far less sophisticated about the kind of toys that you guys play with. But a lot of it is driven by the foreign locations and so forth. So anyway, I think we've touched on all the reasons that people like your kind of books. I find it interesting that here I am, sort of an epicenter of international thrillers. You wouldn't think, just for looking at me, that this would be the case. But I think that those are part of the reasons. Is the travel, it's the learning new stuff. It's the because you're all very good, I think, on researching the geographical and historical, backgrounds to your books, and making them authentic. I will never care what gun anybody's using, or even know, if it's the wrong one. It doesn't matter to me. But I really find them fascinating, and an opportunity to go places and do stuff. So why don't we call up Jason and see Jacob? Sorry, I'm in Jason Bourne. Jacob, it's you. And see whether we have any questions from the audience. Would you rather be Jason Bourne, Jacob? Here's your chance.
Oh, absolutely. No, okay. Yeah, I do have a few questions from the audience here. So are there any particular situations or characters that you met in your lifetime working as an intelligence officer, or any situations that you found yourself in when you were working that made it into the book? Stuff that you can talk about anyway.
Yeah. Part of the few years that I did protective services. So you'll set the beginning of Blackbriar, beginning of Blackbriar Genesis. You're going to have Oliver Menton, who's Threadstone at the time, with two other guys that's going to do bodyguarding for this guy. And you're going to see how they react when they're ambushed, what they're going to do for their protectee. So this is based on real situation, what we would do if we were to get ambushed. So every time there's going to be an ambush in my books, it's going to be based on scenario that I've done when I used to do this for a living. And except for that, there is some intel that I can use to do maybe plot twist in a book. But this is all open sources anyway. So no, I don't think there would be something else. In one of my previous book, the first book that I wrote, The Thin Black Line, my debut in 2015, there was an air marshal that did an intervention in a plane, and I did that for 2 years when I was with the RCMP. Because for your listeners that don't know what the Royal Canadian Mounted Police is, it's the FBI, the ETF, the Secret Service, and the DEA all combined in one big organization. So we're 17,000 police officers that have provincial and federal law enforcement jurisdiction. So that's why we do, when I say I did this, because I'm not the only one. I'm not special. It's because my organization, you can jump from one type of job to the other within the same umbrella. So yeah, I use my experience as an air marshal in that book. And I got a little slap on the wrist for doing that, because even though I didn't say any of the tactics that we use that aren't open sources, sometimes just the fact that you talk about it or that you acknowledge something couldn't be for the best. So no, there was nothing dangerous, but sometimes just like a one sentence too much can say, okay, you shouldn't have said that. So right now I'm always going to be very, very careful about what I talk when it comes to tactics in my books.
Okay, yeah, well, really fascinating. How many books are going to be in this series? Do you know? Is that official yet?
It's not official yet, but I can tell you, even though it was not announced yet, that I've signed for a second book. I'm not sure how it works. Usually, I'm not sure how long the series is going to last. I think if it sells, it's going to continue, because Putnam are really good at continuing a series, and I think they want the train to get rolling. I'm not sure what they have in mind. I don't know how they deal with the estate. What I know is that the Blackbriar Deceit is going to be the title for book number 2 for Blackbriar.
It's largely market driven. I mean, if it's successful, they will continue. And if it turns out that it doesn't meet expectations, very often it doesn't. So it's not really in Simon's control.
No, but I'm going to do my best. I mean, if it sells a lot, it's good for me as well. So I'm going to try to promote the book, as much as I can.
Sure, but none of us can really. I mean, I could give you any number of instances where if I'd been absolutely sure what the market was going to do, I'd have been considered genius. And then, every once in a while I go wrong. I mean, that's the fascinating thing really about publishing in the book world, is that there is no way to predict what will really fly and what won't. There are outliers that completely surprise you. And there are things you think are a slam dunk that flop. Because it really depends on the public, and it depends on how books connect with the public, but it also depends on the zeitgeist of the moment. You can publish a book in one moment, right, Brian? You've got, decades of experience with this. You can publish a really terrific book, and if it hits just at the wrong moment for whatever reason, it doesn't matter how great your book was.
Right. So, no, that's absolutely true. Yeah. I mean, the nature of the economy, where the culture is, where politics are, all that plays into it. So.
And it's also true of the store, Jacob. You remember we had sort of a brisk discussion about why we don't have a budget. And the answer is it's impossible to have a real budget for a bookstore because you just can't predict how it's going to go every month. You just have to sort of go for an average.
Okay.
Did you have another question?
Yeah, this one's from Mark Sussick. All right, this can be both for Brian and Simon. Do you guys have a favorite Ludlum book between the two of you?
That's a good question. I will say it obviously it's hard not to have a soft spot in my heart for The Bourne Identity, but I will say that actually my favorite Ludlum book of all time was the Chancellor Manuscript, which was about this writer and journalist who stumbles onto a conspiracy that suggests that J. Edgar Hoover was actually murdered, and he ultimately ends up turning this into a novel. He ends up becoming a novelist, very similar to Ludlum in a lot of ways, focusing on sort of topical conspiracies. And in fact, I've been always such a fan of the Chancellor Manuscript that when I was writing The Bourne Sacrifice, my latest Bourne novel, I talked with Tom at Putnam and ran it by the folks at the estate that I really wanted to take Peter Chancellor from the Chancellor Manuscript and bring him into the Bourne world and make him a part of the Bourne Sacrifice. And I was really nervous that they'd have an intellectual property problem with that, but they gave me the go-ahead. And so I loved being able to sort of intermingle the Chancellor Manuscript and the Bourne Sacrifice.
That was really cool. I knew I've heard. Yeah. Okay, that's awesome. I'm connecting the dots right now. For me, it's definitely The Bourne Identity, just because I'm not sure it's the best book he's ever written, but it's the one I fell in love with. So for me, it's always going to have a special place in my heart.
Was it the first one you read, Simon?
That's The Bourne Identity that I read.
No, but I mean, sometimes the book we love the most is the first one we read.
The first one I read was The Bourne Identity for him. But I also love the Allcroft Covenant. The Matarizzi Circle was really good as well. I mean, he wrote so many excellent books, and I think they all made the New York Times. I'm not sure, but I think they did. I mean, he was very special.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure right from the beginning with the Scarlatti Inheritance. I think it was certainly on the New York Times list. I can't remember if it was #1, but it was a monster hit right from the get-go. So,
anything else, Jacob?
That's it.
That's it?
Yep.
All righty. Well, guys, it was an absolute treat. You two really worked well together. So thank you so much for joining us. Simon, thank you for sending book plates. I forgot to mention, Simon is in Canada. So we were not able to send him books to sign, but Jacob, you got the book there? Right. So we have copies of it, and Simon very kindly sent book plates, and we all had a guessing game when they came as to who signed this book plate. So, but I identified it successfully as Simon, and I'm hoping that actually maybe with a new book, Simon will come down and see us. But you should be like Brian and sort of plan for winter.
Exactly. No, I'm looking forward to. I was actually thinking about going even this year, but have a book due in 24 hours to my editor. So I've been writing for the last 3 weeks nonstop.
I get it. Well, it's very nice here in the winter, and we're always happy to have guest hosts. So I usually say, if you suddenly decide that you'd like a winter break, those of you who live in cold climates, all you have to do is look at our schedule and write to me and say, I'd really like to show up for this one.
Awesome.
So,
thanks
yeah,
for being
very, very happy to have you. So, Jacob, thank you for holding that up. For those of you watching it, if you're on Facebook, you can also catch these. They tend to stick on YouTube forever. I found some events that we did back in the aughts on YouTube the other day. I found 2 or 3 with Clive. And it was wonderful to hear his voice again. It was like bringing him back to life. Daniel Silva, his very first book event was with me. And there's a Daniel Silva that you can't even recognize, today. I mean, completely
Was that
different.
for The Unlikely Spy?
Yeah, it's fun. And we also make podcasts out of or we do. I say my husband's new vocation is making podcasts. So that's a nice way also to recommend to people that they listen to these conversations. You don't actually have to watch us. You can just listen. So guys, good evening. Thank you so much. Jacob, good night.
Thank you, Barbara.
See you again soon, I hope.
You guys.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Congratulations, Simon, on the launch.
Oh, no, I forgot. Right. Final toast to Simon, right, on publication.